So let me say a couple of things about the nature of this event, a couple of acknowledgments, briefly introduce our speakers, and get started. I was asked on the way here today by a very insightful friend of mine, why in the world are you doing an event to criticize Bill de Blasio? Right? The person who is number 2 in the polls to run for president in the fall is a person who we might charitably call an anti-immigrant, misogynist bigot with a bad haircut. Why are we talking bad about Bill de Blasio? Let me clarify. I think for us to soberly and critically hold him to the fire, right? There's a phrase, hold something to the fire so you can see more clearly, not to burn it up, but really hold it to the fire. One of the things that make US universities great is our porousness to outside voices, to critical thought, to voices that talk about social change way before social change happens. So the Urban Democracy Lab, which is housed at Gallatin School, which used to be the university without walls, takes this very, very seriously. So this is the idea tonight. I welcome you to have this conversation with us. Mary Rowe, who is the Executive Vice President of Municipal Art Society, was very kind in agreeing to host and moderate the panel tonight. To my right, Azi Bara, he said he's just like Madonna. Call him by his first name, Azi. He's a reporter. Literally, this is what you told me, no? Yes. He's a reporter for Politico New York. He has covered politics for the New York Observer, WNYC, the New York Sun, the New York Press. In September 2010, he was named one of City Hall's 40 under 40 for being a young, influential member of New York City politics. And in 2013, he was named one of the best state-based political reporters by the Washington Post. Jarrett Murphy, so after Mary is Jarrett Murphy. He's executive editor and publisher of City Limits, and he has been with that publication since 2007. He grew up in New Britain, Connecticut, graduated from Fordham in the Bronx, and later received a diploma in financial public policy from the LSE and a master's in economics from the New School. Before coming to City Limits in 2007, he worked for WFUV-FM, the Hartford Advocate, CBSNews.com, and The Village Voice. In 2007, he won the James Harrison Award for Social Justice Journalism, the 2007 PASS Award from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, and the Deadline Club's 2011 award for the best coverage of issues affecting minority groups. More importantly, he boxed in the 2009 Golden Gloves, was the 2014 most improved player in the Lansdowne Rugby Football Club, and has been the bench coach in 2 straight Little League championship teams, and also a bass player and vocalist for Fort India Rock Band. Obviously, and you had wife and 2 sons, so I don't know how all that works, but congratulations. And finally, to my right, Jennifer Firmino of the Daily News City. She's a City Hall bureau chief for Daily News. She joined that in 2013 to cover City Hall, the 2013 elections, and city agencies. In her 10 years as a journalist in New York City, she has been a rewrite reporter and covered transit, courts, and breaking news. She's originally from Hyde Park, Mass, and graduated from the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. And our moderator this evening, as I said, is Mary Rowe. She's Executive Vice President of the Municipal Art Society, and she connects the work of the society with the broader goals of livability and resilience, deepening its role in identifying with the broader goals of in identifying and promoting community-based approaches to city building. She has been a grant maker, a social entrepreneur, a facilitator, and calls herself an urban animator. Prior to coming to the Municipal Art Society, Mary was based in New Orleans, where she witnessed firsthand the resilience of community-led initiatives and the need to approach city building holistically, always connecting social, economic, cultural, and environmental considerations. Friends, thank you so much and welcome.
It's so nice to be back at Gallatin. I'm a huge fan of Gallatin. I'm appreciative of the principles that you espouse here and the way that you approach education, particularly education around the city, and how important you are to the future of this city and any other city that you choose to live in, and why these kinds of discussions are so important to have. And I really appreciate the way in which certain aspects of certain faculties within NYU embrace the urban role. As I was walking down from the subway, you know, it is probably, I mean, Louise, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it's probably one of the most embedded urban campuses in the world. And it's incumbent upon you to really use this lab effectively for your own education and for our benefit, having you be with us in this great experiment called the city. So one of the things we're going to do is each of these folks is going to throw out a few ideas and their own critique of what we think is going on. I'm hoping that what they're going to touch on is they're going to define what progressive means. And I think so. They've got prepared remarks, but they're flexible, so I bet they'll throw that in. And the other thing that I think we need to think a little bit about is what is our expectation of municipal leadership, and how much do we actually vest in the mayor and in his or her administration. As you heard in the introduction, I spent 5 years in New Orleans post-Katrina, where there really was no effective municipal administration, and the city had to basically reinvent itself. And now it's in a position where it actually has a functioning city government and a mayor. And it's a really interesting thing to watch how a city thrives or doesn't, in spite of, supported by the kind of leadership that an administration can provide or doesn't provide. Lots and lots of cities go through these different phases, and we're in the midst of one here that's different from the previous one, and I think it's important for us to pay attention. But really, the city belongs to us. It's not all vested in one person, whether he or she is the mayor or the king or not. So, okay, which of you wants to go first? How about you, Madonna? Why don't you go?
I am never going to live that down.
That's good. You're right.
Yeah, it's better than having the word disgrace on my tombstone, so I'll deal with
You're
that.
young yet.
Yeah, yes. The night is young. Thank you all for having this event, particularly on a day when the New York Times helped contribute to this event by publishing a story about a potential challenger to Mayor Bill de Blasio in the form of Representative Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn. The story, which is something I think we've all touched upon in our reporting, is about the idea that Mayor Bill de Blasio, after the 2013 election, hasn't lived up to his promises that people have had about him in terms of criminal justice. The story today, the big revelation I think it was that Bill Thompson, one of the main candidates in the 2013 race, was encouraging Hakeem Jeffries to look at running against de Blasio in 2017. And there was even an anecdote that Al Sharpton spoke to Hakeem about this potential issue. So thank you for having this such well-timed event. Defining progressivism in the area of criminal justice, it's probably one of the fastest moving and most dynamic conversations that people in public policy are having. Several years ago, what it meant to be a Democrat and what it meant to be progressive in the area of gay rights rapidly changed. The floor became the ceiling. Gay marriage became a litmus test and not simply, a high bar to reach for. And now it's sort of taken for granted that you almost can't be in the party unless you're fully supportive of not just gay rights, but a host of other issues that were almost unimaginable a short time ago. In the area of criminal justice, you're sort of seeing a very similar movement. There's the Black Lives Matter movement. There are people who have been involved before that, trying to reform prisons, which leads into a conversation of reforming police activities. Now you have a conversation about body cameras and access to body cameras. And all of these are complicated. They are very technical. They involve very passionate conversations about race and class and what role municipal government plays in people's lives. And that conversation is happening very swiftly, and it's part of what helped propel Bill de Blasio into office. In 2013, his one campaign ad was featuring his son with a very big afro, and his son said, my dad's going to end the stop and frisk era. A lot of the conversation in 2013 was about stop and frisk, police stopping someone on the street, questioning them, and even patting them down. The numbers of stop and frisks had risen dramatically under Michael Bloomberg and Ray Kelly, peaked in 2011, and then something amazing happened that virtually went unreported. Those numbers started to decline from about 680,000 to roughly around 500,000, and steadily since then. But what was interesting was Michael Bloomberg and Ray Kelly did not have an incentive to acknowledge that decline. So as you had the 2013 campaign election approaching, you had more activists raising their voices about stop and frisk as it was starting to come down, but not widely acknowledged to come down. that issue became something that people could focus on, something that Bill de Blasio attached himself to, and it became the perhaps only real conversation that people had about criminal justice in 2013. There was some talk about the Inspector General, there was some talk about other issues. Very late in the primary season, there was talk about broken windows, but it was primarily about stop and frisk. When Bill de Blasio came into office in 2014, one of the major announcements that his police commissioner made was in January, was that the problem with stop and frisk is over. He announces the victory even before it actually happens, but the number of stop and frisks declined even more dramatically. Crime stays low, and 2014 is a record year in terms of safety. De Blasio pretty much had that issue. He had addressed criticisms that crime is going to spike when he first gets in. But what's happening now is the city council and activists are saying there's other things that need to happen that you're not doing. Questions about how much, what kind of documentation do officers need to give to a person they stop but don't arrest? Do police officers have a right to see body camera footage before talking to an investigator that's investigating a potential abuse? These and other issues, the city council is putting forward a bunch of reforms, and the mayor and his police commissioner have uniformly opposed each and every one of those measures. They're 0 for 9. And what some lawmakers and progressives are saying is the complaint that the mayor and Bill Bratton are not only opposing the legislation, they're opposing the goals within those legislations and are not even saying how we're going to get there. One of the bills is a bill to criminally ban police chokeholds. Currently, a police officer under state law in certain circumstances can legally put someone in what is called a quote-unquote chokehold. Under the NYPD patrol guidelines, that actual maneuver is prohibited, but the patrol guidelines are not penal law. There is a bill in the city council to say, you know what, that maneuver would be illegal. Bill Bratton opposes it, Bill de Blasio opposes it, Hakeem Jeffries supports it. So that's just a brief overview of some of the technical layouts of the conversation about progressivism and de Blasio in terms of criminal justice, and I'm sure there'll be much more to say about that going forward.
Okay, great.
So I'm going to talk about transportation. And, transportation is one of those issues that, there's the famous quote that there's no Democrat or Republican way to take out the trash. Like, transportation is a lot like that. Like, it's something that it touches everyone's life and it's important. And I would say covering the mayor, the biggest transportation story of the year was his battle with Uber, which was, the taxi app company that's really popular. It's sort of, it came in, and I used to be the transit reporter in 2011, and the big story in 2011, a big transit story, was how bulletproof the yellow cab medallions were. They were a better investment than gold. They had a better rate of return than index stocks. There's all these stories. This was this unbelievable investment that you could make so much money off of. That was 4 years ago. You now have the biggest taxi medallion owner in the city owns 900 medallions. Gene Friedman's declaring bankruptcy. You have more yellow cabs, more Uber taxis on the road than yellow cabs. And the number of yellow cabs is a highly regulated thing. Even just getting extra medallions would be this difficult process that you had to go through, Albany. So what happens, this little Uber comes in, they're now expanding, I think it's 2,000 cars a month or something they're adding. So as mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio started out pretty innocently enough, says, I want to study growth. And it was really it was kind of all hell broke loose. One day he says it, and then Uber, which is worth $50 billion,
Which is valued
at $50 billion, sort of just comes out of nowhere. There's TV ads. It was like a campaign, and it's the summer. There's TV ads every time you turn the television on. They actually made an app called the de Blasio app. So every person in New York City that opened up an Uber, they could send a letter to City Hall and say, I want my Uber. They basically and there would be a little thing telling you if de Blasio's bill to curb our growth goes through, your cab will take 25 minutes to come. Right now you're only going to have to wait 3 minutes. And so everybody, got this thing. So de Blasio really, and I mean, I think this somewhat shows his progressiveness in that you could argue that somebody, a different type of mayor, might not want to regulate a super fast growing, company, startup that is really popular. Mike Bloomberg, he had his issues with the yellow cabs. I don't think that he would have been so quick to limit growth and to want to regulate this, to regulate this company. But the yellow cab industry, it's been here. The medallion system's been in place since Fiorello LaGuardia, which is, you need a medallion to run a cab. And you buy it from the city, it raises a lot of money from the city. So de Blasio, in his attack against them, he took a very sort of textbook progressive campaign that he ran against them, which was, he said, they're not protecting workers enough, we don't know what's going on with them, they're expanding, it's bad for the environment. So he sort of takes that, and ended up not really working because he didn't have the support in the council, and it sort of fell through. But he did, he gave it the try that way. And yeah, it sort of showed, another thing that happened with that was that there was a problem that Uber took his base a little bit in that they had a lot of minority support. There were minority politicians that, this has always been a problem with taxis where they don't want to go to the outer boroughs. They don't want to go, there's problems with minorities that say, they can't get picked up. So Uber took this tactic where they took the minority, they took minority New Yorkers. They had the borough president of Brooklyn, who's black, got up there and said, I'm in a suit and tie and I can't get a yellow taxi. They won't stop for me. And this was really like, grabbing at de Blasio's base. So it ended up falling through. Other sort of ways, I don't necessarily feel as though in many ways the mayor is a textbook progressive on transportation issues. He has never embraced bike lanes in the way that Mayor Bloomberg did. City Bike has expanded really significantly under his watch. It's on the Upper West Side, Upper East Side. Now it's in the outer boroughs. The Mayor de Blasio, not that he, they put out press releases, but he never, when, City Bike was sort of Bloomberg's baby, the mayor never really went out and touted those. He also recently, at least he said he would think about ripping up the pedestrian plazas in Times Square, which are really, really beloved by transportation, like mass transit advocates. And these plazas have made it so that you can't drive through Times Square, and they're hated by drivers, but they're really liked by people who for years have said that the congestion there has been bad for the environment. It's also bad. There's so many people on the sidewalks that it's spilling out. So this was a pretty recent thing, and I think it really surprised a lot of these sort of mass transit advocates and transportation advocates that were really happy with that aspect of it. But the thing with de Blasio, I think that's sort of different, is that he is an outer borough guy. And I think your real progressive transportation advocate is not, like, de Blasio is a guy who drives. He comes from an area where a lot of people have cars. And, he doesn't necessarily, he can understand like the frustration of being stuck in traffic in Times Square and wanting to maybe drive in if you're coming in to see a Broadway show, which is sort of like an outer borough feeling on that you don't want to come out of a Broadway show at 10:30 at night and hop on an hour subway to get out to Brooklyn. So yeah, I wouldn't say that he is the most progressive on transportation, but he's progressive in the sense that he wants his transportation policies to uplift the poor. And that's sort of the focus of, what he's thinking, like he has this 5-borough ferry system. But he's more, I would say his transportation is more like an outer borough New Yorker than your typical, transportation advocate. And his politics are always progressive. You forgot, he's always, but when he comes into a fight with somebody like Uber, or he's always going to sort of frame it in the like anti-big business or government needs to solve this problem. This Vision Zero, which is his big transportation policy, which is that like government, there's the Vision Zero, his Vision Zero plan would be that there is not going to be a single person fatality, pedestrian fatality by 2024. And, I think that's a very progressive vision that like government could come in and sort of redesign the streets and redesign this problem, which is really government battling death, right? So government's going to come in, take this, and we're going to stop death by traffic. And I feel like to feel as though government is a solution in such a problem like that is pretty progressive. So he's complicated, like a lot of people, with transportation.
Jared?
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry about that really long bio. I have to edit that down. It's kind of, those awards are starting to sound, and my pathetic boxing career is starting to sound a little long. And we have won now 3 Little League championships, so that also deserves consecutive three-peat. What does progressivism mean to me? To me, it means using the tools of government to actively attack injustice and the inequalities and inequities that other parts of our society generate. And I expect our mayors to approach that task using the powers they have to try to achieve the optimal mix of different policies and efforts that will achieve that. Knowing that a mayor's policy power is limited. The city is a creation of the state. There are limited resources. But that the mayor also has the ability to use his bully pulpit and to be, in some cases, a national leader on these issues. And as the mayor of New York is kind of positioned to do that. Housing policy is obviously a major focus for the mayor's progressivism. If you think about the critique during the 2013 campaign, the commercial was about stop and frisk, but the anxiety the mayor was tapping into addressed a lot of people who had never been stopped or frisked and really probably weren't at much risk of that. It was this idea that people were being priced out of the city, the income inequality was rampant. And at the heart of that really is the housing question. You could have a society that's vastly unequal in terms of what people make, but it can still function. It might not be fair, it can still function though if folks can afford to live in the city. But that is what was starting to not happen very noticeably under Mayor Bloomberg, and that's what Mayor de Blasio tapped into. One of the issues, Jennifer quoted the famous aphorism about there's no Democratic or Republican way to take out the trash, which we could debate. There's another one that I think applies here, which is the famous Mario Cuomo quote about how people govern in campaign in poetry and govern in prose. When it comes to municipal politics, though, it's like they campaign in poetry and they govern in like stereo instructions. Like you get very, very deep into the weeds very quickly, and things get pretty complicated. And so early on in the de Blasio administration, when the kind of bloom really came off the rose, when the pre-K fight was getting nasty, when the charter school thing blew up in his face, I had lunch with the de Blasio guy, an advisor. And, I was talking about pre-K this and pre-K that, and he at one point kind of waved his hand and said, pre-K is easy. Building 200,000 units of affordable housing, that's the real battle. And he's right, because affordable housing is incredibly difficult. There's the basic math problem of people not being able to afford it. And it's not just about rapacious profit making, it's the fact that people's incomes are so low that they just can't afford the price of housing that's newly built in New York City. It just doesn't work. You have that issue. You have federal programs that are tied to income levels that have nothing to do with New York City. You have the very basic constraint of space and the fact that neighbors don't always want the housing there that everyone else in general is clamoring for. And you have a lot of different groups who have a role and a say and a need when it comes to affordable housing. You have unions who want to build it, which makes it more expensive. And you have subsets within the group of people who need affordable housing. You have seniors, you have the homeless. Any unit you reserve for the homeless is a unit that is not reserved for someone else. And then you have some housing that requires more than just bricks and mortar. If you have senior housing or supportive housing you've heard a lot about, that's just not housing. That's housing plus services, otherwise it's not really what they're calling it. So you have all these complications when it comes to constructing affordable housing, the mayor's kind of big ticket plan of 200,000 units over 10 years. And that is just one of the many different housing portfolios he has to be active in. You also have moderating and mediating tenant-landlord relations. You have NYCHA, which is a city unto itself in the midst of a decade-long, deep existential fiscal crisis. You have the homelessness problem which is obviously an affordable housing problem and also about the city's shelter system and in some cases, although not in most cases, mental illness. And you have rent regulations, which are probably the most important affordable housing program, don't involve constructing housing, involve preserving it, but are the classic example of New York being beholden to people who make policy upstate, specifically Republican state senators who don't have a single rent-regulated unit in their districts, maybe not even very many tenants in their districts, who have in many ways more power over our rent regs than the mayor of New York does. So you have all that in the mix, and you could get into the details of each ad nauseum, and perhaps you will. Maybe not quite to ad nauseum because it's pre-dinner time, but I think de Blasio tapped into a deep reservoir of anxiety and hope, and there's that helped him get elected, and there's a responsibility that comes with that. And so people have been getting impatient about aspects of his plan because he's not revealed all of it, partly because he wants to, I think, genuinely have a ground-up community visioning process in some of the neighborhoods he's targeting. And so for that reason, there is no citywide plan exactly of how many units are going to look like this, how many like that, who's going to be served. There are sort of different policy threads that can be applied in different neighborhoods, but we really don't know how they will be yet. So there's impatience about that. There's anxiety in some of the neighborhoods who are worried about basically affordable housing-led gentrification. If you think about the way affordable housing is built, it can be built for incomes that are far in excess of what folks make in a neighborhood. So you could welcome affordable housing and then through secondary displacement get priced out of your own neighborhood. People are really, really worried about that. And the mayor has been trying to ease those fears, but he hasn't fully succeeded yet, partly because a lot of these plans are kind of inchoate. We really don't know what they look like yet. On NYCHA, there's been impatience about the ability to deliver repairs. And, Bill de Blasio has been a heck of a lot better on NYCHA than Bloomberg ever was. He stopped early on charging NYCHA for police services. He stopped charging it payments in lieu of taxes. But again, he tapped into some hopes. He stepped into a situation where, he's been mayor 6 months, a year and a half, but people have been waiting for many, many years to get their doors fixed and their mold remediated. To them, it doesn't matter that he hasn't been there long enough to really get his teeth into it. They want action now. And so the question I think a lot of people are asking about the homeless stories and others is de Blasio being held to a higher standard? And I think the answer is yes, and that's because he asked for that. So what makes a story fair or unfair, or our own expectations as voters, is not whether we hold him to a higher standard because he made these his issues, but whether or not that standard takes into account what his actual powers are, because they are not infinite. And one final note, in the housing community, which I talk to a lot, there is a worry that we've become too fixated on numbers when it comes to housing. That if de Blasio does or doesn't make 200,000 units, he will or won't be deemed a success, when in fact that will have very little to do with whether he has addressed the root problem of affordability in the city. You could build 200,000 units of housing, that doesn't help anybody when it comes to actually stopping this, this tide of people being priced out. And so that goal, which has really been kind of wired into city politics since Ed Koch, the 10-year plan promising 250,000, Mayor Bloomberg with 165,000, people get fixated on that. And I would just say what we all have to keep our eye on is not so much the number, but this more important and frankly probably harder to measure idea of whether he's actually attacked the affordability crisis and the threat it poses to his progressive vision. Thank you.
Great. I was just going to say there's seats. Do you want to come in, or are you going to change our mics? Okay. You burnt the battery out, Jared. How'd it go? You blew it. So I want to just pose something a little different. I want to think about progressive as defining an approach that's open to change, or as you people call it, innovation. That's the new word for change. Trying something differently. I mean, I'm interested how quickly ideological we get here, but I think we'd be hard. I mean, I love your definition. I want to go home and think about it. To attack injustice, but I don't think that I would think the opposite to a progressive mayor is a regressive mayor that's not looking at alternative ways of thinking and isn't prepared to address new ways to address things. And I don't think those regressive mayors are running around trying to support injustice. So I would like to get rid of the ideology and just think about whether or not we're setting up a situation where this, because some of what you just described, Jennifer, is a bit of resistance on his part to certain kinds of innovation, right? And the notion that that he brings a suburban set of values and experience.
I would say outer
That's a pretty
borough
interesting question.
more than.
Well, I know, but when you were
Suburban.
when you were describing outer borough, it
Well,
sounded
the
to me
outer
like
borough
suburban. He
is
likes
a
his
more-
car. That's a suburban.
I mean,
thing.
there is. I mean, the reason I say that he likes his car, there's this famous story of him as public advocate where he ditched his detail. He can't ditch his detail as mayor, like But as public advocate, he ditched his detail. He said, "No, I'd rather do it myself. Nobody's driving me around." So he didn't have cops
Right.
driving him around because he's a driver. But I mean, I think an outer borough New Yorker is different than a suburbanite, but it's closer to a suburbanite
I get
than.
that. I get that.
Yeah.
But it's also, it relates to what Ozzy was trying to address too around criminal justice. If you think about the conditions that you all sort of described, it has to do with the polarization of a super successful city, however you define success. We have a dilemma here that New York has, that London has, that Hong Kong is having, that San Francisco is having. It's a big Gordian knot that all of you urbanists need to get your heads into and start thinking about how these kinds of changes happen. And New York leads the country in North America in being ahead on confronting challenges. A lot of it presents to us sooner than it presents anywhere else. Someday this will be Cincinnati's challenge, someday it'll be Minneapolis' challenge. And that idea of how you stitch a city back together, whether it's through transportation, whether it's through interventionist public policy, or whether it's through criminal justice reform, it's all about this polarization piece. And I'm just curious what you think a progressive approach would be to that.
Yeah, when you define progressive as the opposite of regressive,
Right.
forward versus backwards, but by that definition, you would have to relabel Bill de Blasio. He appoints Bill Bratton,
Right.
Rudy Giuliani's
Right.
first police commissioner.
Right.
Throwback from the past. Bratton brings in people he worked with in '94.
Right.
So his entire team, throwback from the past. De Blasio talks about broken windows, which Bratton brought, not in 1994 when he was police commissioner, but in 1990 when he was New York City transit chief.
Right. Right.
And the,
So do you think he's open to new ideas? Would you suggest that, I mean, you're talking
Right,
about
right, all right, so-
populating his administration with people that have been around a while. With all due respect to those of us that have been around a while.
well, let's get specific. Like, what are the new ideas? Neighborhood policing? Bill Bratton has talked about that. Look at his 1998 book. You know, when he joined the Boston Police Department in the 1970s, one of the reasons why he rose through the ranks, other than like a very bizarre confrontation that he disarmed an armed man holding a woman hostage. It happened to be outside of the window of a police union chief who saw it. And that's what helps give him this huge accolade and helps him rise through the ranks and becomes at 33 one of the highest ranking officials in the Boston Police Department and sets his career forward. But the thing that he had tried to do in Boston, which he's trying to do now, think about how many years that is neighborhood policing. This is something he tried to do when he was here before. So that's not new. The idea of making criminal a police chokehold, new idea in light of the Eric Garner case. De Blasio is resisting it. The idea of having police give some type of business card or quote unquote receipt for people they stop but do not arrest. That's being mandated by a court monitor stemming from the 2013 stop and frisk case that happened under Bloomberg. De Blasio is resisting that. He's resisting legislation about that.
So with my definition, you would say he's not progressive.
I would say if you're defining progressive as the opposite of quote unquote regressive with new ideas, there are new ideas on the table that he is not embracing.
I don't think we should not be deluded by the shared letters in the words progress and
Yes.
progressive
And regress.
and regress. Embracing new ideas doesn't make you progressive. At one point, stop and frisk was a new idea.
I mean, there
That's
are
not
bad
progressive.
new ideas.
Right, there are bad new ideas.
And you're
Simply,
suggesting that only good ideas are progressive.
Well, I think I'll go back to my initial definition,
Jared.
which is that you can. A classic example is Mayor Bloomberg set out when he was elected to a second term to make a substantial reduction in poverty in New York City, and this was seen as a progressive goal. And so to do that, he rolled out a bevy of programs, mainly small pilot programs, and he was lauded for how innovative and progressive they were. One of those programs was this conditional cash transfer program, which would pay people for like bringing their kids to the dentist.
Right.
And it was founded on the idea that poverty to some degree is a failure by poor families to do those things, which I didn't find to be particularly progressive. A program that he resisted until the city council forced it down his throat was simply to give people a bigger child tax credit. That is not a new idea, but to me that was a lot more progressive. De Blasio certainly has rejected some things. He's also, Vision Zero is pretty progressive. Mandatory inclusionary zoning is pretty progressive. The idea behind One NYC of, linking, I think, at a deep level, the fight to reduce income inequality and the fight to create a more sustainable city environment, I think that's pretty progressive. If you're going to hit him on being resistant to change, I think what you have to mention is the U word. His being beholden to some degree to unions, and I think that enters into the conversation about schools. That's a fair question. I think his ties to the taxi industry certainly come up in the discussion about Uber and other ways of thinking about transportation. So he has resisted some ideas, and to some degree that might be regressive on his part. But it's not strictly a new and shiny versus old and dull thing. Some of the old dull stuff we have worked pretty good.
Well, and I mean, and Audrey was just talking about some old dull stuff that might actually be effective. Community policing is not a.
Oh, and just one more blast from the past, because I don't.
It's like 10 years ago for him, but yeah, okay.
Yes, but also just earlier this week, Bill Bratton said he spent the weekend reading the Moynihan Report from 1965.
Right.
And he called it prescient. He called it. Right, and the mayor disagreed with him, and then Bratton said, "I'm sorry. When I was talking about values, I didn't mean the blacks. I was actually talking about young people." So there is this conversation that people do have sometimes about the past and the future. But I think Jared's point is right. To have the dichotomy between pro and regressive.
No, and I mean, and you
You're
hear
right,
me
yeah.
pushing back basically on labeling in any way. I'm not sure that calling somebody progressive or regressive is very effective. I think we should be talking about whether this mayor and this administration is effective. Are they? I'm just the moderator. They don't really need to hear me. Are they really? Do we see them tackling these things? So let's look at your piece. Uber is a part of a much larger trend around tech-enabled sharing economy stuff, peer-to-peer stuff, and we've got it happening all over the place. And we don't know what the next version of this is. It may be in criminal justice. There's going to be a sharing economy piece. And who knows where it's going to be next? And the question, I think, is whether we're really equipped, and whether city governments are equipping themselves to somehow maximize the benefits of these kinds of new approaches to administering things, deriving benefits, whether it's Uber or isn't it, or are they going to be so reactionary? How about that one? That they can't make
Right.
room for it.
I
I
mean,
I think a lot of us felt with Uber that it's a bit like standing in front of the Mississippi. That's my New Orleans image. That you can't. You've got to just find a way to live with this
Right.
and make it work and not have it disadvantage people. But you can't probably stop it.
It's, the thing with Uber, everybody here has tried to get a cab at a time when they
Right.
can't. And before Uber came along, it was this, to even add, this is another thing, like in 2011, they wanted to add, how many medallions was it? Like 500 medallions? And it took like years to get Albany to approve that. And like, meanwhile, you can't get a cab in rush hour. And,
Right.
and like they have to do an environmental review and of the whole, and then there's the problem of the cabs not going into outer borough neighborhoods. They're always in, central Manhattan. So that was a huge problem. So then Uber comes and it's like, oh, that problem's gone. There's a million cabs. But it brings this other problem
Right.
that,
Right.
traffic has slowed. When de Blasio was like fighting them, traffic has slowed. I think it was like a mile per hour, and like they expect it more because there's 2,000 cars a month coming into the city that are these Uber cars. They're not there all the time like yellow cabs, but they're there. And so it was a problem that Uber sort of solved, but also brought about new problems.
Just like Airbnb, it's still
Right.
the same kind of thing, right? He's bringing. But if you were to look, comparing these to other mayoralty administrations you've watched, where do you think we are 2 years in? Is he where he should be? Is the administration? Is it effective?
I
What do you? That's
I
a
think
pregnant
it's
pause
a
is
little
from-
early to. I honestly think we're going to know very soon.
When do you think we'll have a sense?
I honestly think. I think
I'm
by,
impatient
I should
right
say
Tuesday.
no. I
It's
think
like
that
Spaceballs soon.
he's definitely he's had some things that have been effective. He's got pre-kindergarten. It's about to roll out the second year. that's clearly effective. He's made some real advances with Vision Zero. There's the lowest pedestrian fatalities, I think, since 1910. And that was something that nobody was really looking at, and it was seriously a problem. So there are definitely things that he can point to, but it's a question of whether some of the other perception of him is really like breaking through, and whether he's going to really win hearts and minds of New Yorkers, and whether he's going to have a serious challenger in 2017 that will really take up a lot of his time, and maybe make it harder for him to move forward with some other things.
I mean, if you think of the mantra "Tale of Two Cities," 2 years from now, is it going to be the same mantra? And well, I'm still here trying to battle the Tale of Two Cities, or are we going to be a tale of 10 cities, one city?
Yeah. I mean, I think Tale of Two Cities is even older than the Moynihan Report.
It is. Indeed, it is. It is.
And better written too.
I'm glad
But-
your education's paying off. Your parents would be happy.
Jesuits, they do well. I think it's a big bear to tackle, and I think he can say, we're in this fight. Don't pull me out now. He has to show some progress. There's always been a question of how exactly we were going to measure whether or not the city was more equal than it used to be, whether the city even has policy tools to really affect that. What bothers me about what I've seen so far is that there was a narrative about what de Blasio's problem was going to be, and it was partly because of who he was and partly because of what we've come to know liberal progressive mayors to do, whether they're Dinkins or Lindsay, which is to have a lot of high-minded ideals and be terrible at executing them, to be bad managers. That narrative bothered me for a lot of reasons. One, because Bloomberg was not always a great manager, but the narrative on him was quite different, so that storyline didn't get picked up. But I have to say that as unfair as that narrative was, de Blasio has sort of walked smack into it time and time again, showing up late to press conferences, having a big day at the gym when people are shooting at firefighters, things like that. Individually, they're defensible. The mayor really doesn't need to go to a crime scene. What's he going to do? Shoot the guy back? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But the awareness of perception has been a real problem. The recognition that I always butcher this phrase, but that Caesar's wife has to be beyond reproach. That's it, right?
Yep, that's pretty good.
That's the gist of it. Whoever Caesar is.
Who had to several.
Right. I think that and the idea of managing the press has been very difficult for him. And what's interesting is that to this point, it's almost as if de Blasio has been a better mayor than a politician, which is funny because he's like a political animal, right?
Why
That's
are
like
you
where he
saying
comes
this?
from.
Why are you saying he's been a better mayor than a
Well, I think,
politician?
as Jennifer said, the story, the narrative that he's, passed pre-K, that he's, he has done a lot. He's accomplished some major things for being a year and a half in. They're overshadowed by, Cuomo is always slapping him around.
Mm-hmm.
He's showing up late. He's not managing things properly. He has too tight a closed circle. He's closed with the press. There were events off his schedule and closed press and wouldn't go off topic, and the transparency's not been there. I think that has come to dominate as we knew it would because that narrative was in place. And so when you're faced with that situation, it's easy for me to say because I'll never be mayor, you could either you could whine about it, or you could realize that's the deal, and you have to attack it every day and go out of your way to show that you are totally in charge, because you're going to have to fight against that, till the end of term 2. If it exists.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed that you're ruling out a run for mayor. At some point. This moment, right?
Never say never.
Well, yeah, if nominated.
What do you think in terms of that? Where is he on the trajectory of?
I
where you
think
expect-
Jared's right that it's surprising or unexpected for some people that de Blasio would be a better manager than politician, a better mayor than politician. One of my colleagues, Dana Rubenstein, I believe, wrote a story to that effect. One specific example of where he acted perhaps in terms of the right policy but not in the right execution was when he criticized Governor Andrew Cuomo. And there was a Democratic operative who sort of laid out to me why that was a misstep on his part. The city is a creature of the state. A lot of the powers that people believe a mayor has, it's actually rested in Albany and not in City Hall. So anytime there's a question about whether the city can do something, you usually end up having to go through Albany for what you want. when the mayor sat down and said Governor Cuomo was vindictive, hurting New Yorkers for any number of policy issues, and seeking revenge for perceived slights, he rattled off a number of issues that substantively, I believe most people in room 9, most observers said, you know what? He's right. He is being accurate and detailed and specific. The problem in the execution was that he does it at the end of session, right before he goes on vacation for a week. So you have this long, hot summer with a guy with a very long memory in Albany, and you literally have the mayor out of town.
Right.
So what
So it's
happened?
poor judgment.
It was poor execution of what was otherwise a plan that very few people found objectionable.
Well, and I think that, I mean, I think we should think now, what do you want in the next 2 years? Like, do you want more of that? Is more robust kind of muscular leadership to say, wait a second, you may say that we're a dependent little creature of the state, but we're robust and we need support?
I think as a reporter and someone that lives here and someone that has family and friends that live here, what I would like to see
Yeah.
is, an effective government, one that is open and transparent, that is responsive to reporters' inquiries, responsive to freedom of information law requests.
Which it isn't.
Which
It's
Bill
not
Bill
so good.
Bill De Blasio is
It's
the one
not
who
doing that well.
had,
Not
he's
that
the one who gave the New York Police Department an F grade for FOIL requests
Yeah.
when he was public advocate, and most reporters I don't think would change that grade at this point.
So he's made no
So
inroads.
but
So you'd like to see better transparency. What else would you like to see?
In terms of being prompt, being on time, just government being responsive, just the way that any other
You're
citizen.
really worried that he's not prompt?
No, do you know what it is? We have sorry.
Yes, it's a major part of my day.
Is it really a problem?
Yeah, it's
He's just-
horrible.
because he's overbooked, or he doesn't
No,
wear a
it's-
watch, or what's the point? He's got staff to keep him on time. He's cavalier. You mean he conveys a.
But
kind of
I think
lackadaisical-
it's like you said. It's exactly like you said. Like he came in with this narrative that he's not a good manager, right? And so, don't you want to change that? Like, if people think that you're
I don't know, do
terrible,
you have a clean room? You kind of give up on.
but like
some of
nobody.
these
That's the
things.
thing. Like, if you were hitting at me, say when I started my job, they were like, Jennifer's going to be good at this, but she's going to be terrible at that. We're going to have to watch her. I'd really work on that, and I think it's sort of it says something. But and
It's not
something.
puritanical enough. He's not working on.
No,
his
I mean, but
faults.
it's something that an average New Yorker can. I've met people, and when I tell them what I do, they go, "Is he really late all the time?" And I go, "Yes."
Right, but remember, the stories about him being late were coming on the heels of slowly appointing his administration,
He was
slowly rolling out, policy
It's not
initiatives.
just
It was
personal hygiene.
Oversleeping one day on the campaign. Remember that?
right.
He had a rough night. I mean, and I don't look. Everybody,
No.
everybody oversleeps. I'm not. But
And,
like,
you know,
it just
sometimes-
doesn't look
I should
good.
say sometimes it's not. I mean, I don't attend press conferences any more than I have to, so I do it a lot less than my colleagues here. So I don't know if he's as late as he was in the beginning, but there was the memorial to the plane that crashed on Rockaways, which to show up late for that, it's more than just sort of inconveniencing us and our deadlines. There's a certain
Disrespectful.
it conveys that, and I don't think it's intentional. I don't think he wanted to show disrespect, but it sends that kind of a message.
So I think it's an arrogance thing, isn't it? I mean, isn't that either?
I don't think he's arrogant, but I think it suggests that he
Narcissistic.
is.
You've got a psychologist.
It's I'm not. I want to make it clear that I'm not complaining about him. I'm saying things that like. If you want to attack that perception problem, which his polls have consistently sung, he's there because voters put him there.
Okay,
so
well, give me a couple of other things that aspirations, because they're never going to invite us back, or maybe they will invite us back next year. But I mean, what do we want to say? What would give the badge of yep, that was a progressive term? What would you like to see?
my feeling always with him, I think something that he could do sort of to grow. I think if he tried to, I think he's often doing things for his base. And that if he sort of tried,
Transcend that a little
if
bit.
he tried to transcend that, I think that would help him a lot to sort of maybe win some, I don't think he's won anybody over. And I don't think,
Huh.
and
So you mean
can't-
stitch together some of that polarization?
Yeah, like
I've been
stitch
letting-
together
if you
some
could
of
create
that.
more of a kind of city consensus.
right, and I think that would help him achieve a lot of his goals, and, not so much, maybe not have the city so partisan where there's,
Yeah?
Yeah, and I think an area where I would love to see that is on education. I mean, if he could somehow get us beyond this, very, very, at this point, tiresome and I think unhelpful, charters are good, charters are bad,
Right.
unions are terrible, unions are great argument. If he could somehow, given his credentials and his background, if he could somehow figure out a way to get beyond that, to get to a point where we have a more inclusive idea of what a progressive education philosophy might look like. Because there is a case where, in many cases, many of us who call progressives, or ourselves progressives, say no a lot. And that's never necessarily a great thing when schools are failing, huge numbers of our fellow citizens. So if you could somehow figure out a way to use that issue of all issues, I think first of all, it'd be smart politics, but I also think that would really bring the city to a new place, and I think that would be helpful. It's challenging, and there are a lot of people who would try to knife him in the back if he did that, not figuratively speaking. But I think that would be something I'd love to see.
So I'm going to give you a fair warning that we're going to go out to you in a second. So get ready thinking about what you want to raise with this panel and ask them about. And while you're thinking about that, I have a question in terms of my world and my work. So I work for an organization that's completely focused on the stewardship of the physical city, the spatial city. We've been at it for over a century. And I wonder the extent to which this mayor actually thinks about, when you were lamenting that cities are creatures of a senior government, there's lots of stuff that we don't have any impact on. But the mayor actually and city council have all sorts of things they can do in the physical city around planning and zoning and various kinds of incentives that they can create and how the physical layout. The only thing we've really talked about is the Times Square debate. What about this notion that you've got high-end luxury housing going up without much public review, it would appear? What about the fact that we have sort of a lack of sort of equitable development despite the aspiration around affordable housing? Do you see a policy, kind of innovation that he can introduce that would restore more of a sense of that we're in this together, that we're not just creating places for rich people to come and vacation for 3 weeks and then leave?
Well, there are moves toward doing that. That's the inclusionary zoning part of his housing plan, which won't be.
There aren't going to be inclusionary zoning in those towers on 57th Street.
Not the existing ones, no. But
there's a lot of them, though. The existing ones, but there's a number of them in the pipeline.
Right. If it's in the pipeline, he could have done about that. And
sorry about 57th Street, done. Sorry.
But in the other areas, that's precisely what he's going to try to do. He's going to have a denser, more equitable city. That's the vision.
But those rezonings are not. They're not downtown. The proposed rezonings at the moment are in various parts of the.
Well, this is where sort of like the stereo instructions come into it. It's very expensive to build there. No matter how you weld people of different income groups together, you're only going to get so many units there, and we need a lot of units. I think this mayor does actually think a lot about the space. It's interesting. Bloomberg rezoned. What was it? What was the percentage?
Like very high.
Yeah. Basically, the size of San Francisco was rezoned by Michael Bloomberg, and after that was done, people thought, well, that would probably be it. But there are several areas that will be rezoned under De Blasio with a slightly different set of values. They are looking at a lot of waterfront areas specific to climate risks, which I think is interesting, in a much more detailed way that De Blasio, having had the benefit of seeing Sandy, is doing compared to what Bloomberg did. So I think there is a spatial element to it, and I think it is about creating a more of a kind of common destiny for the city. Obviously, it involves alliances and accommodations aplenty, whether it's teaming up with REBNY to reform 421A or you name it, and I think that's why people get nervous, partly because there's not really a reservoir of trust. Just like the NYCHA example, if you're a person who is nervous about what's going on in Brooklyn, De Blasio's promises to do it differently from the previous guys who made you worry about your ability to stay in your neighborhood. I don't know how much currency they have.
Yeah. It's so complicated, isn't it? Because it's not just about housing. It's also that we can't seem to find places for people to start businesses. We've got family businesses that are unable to hang on because the rents are going too high. So again, it's the challenges of a success in a city. All right, who's got the microphone? What would you like to pose and ask or posit about the progressive mayor and the progressive, and whether we could be, I guess the question we should be asking is, can New York be a progressive city? Is it possible? Yes, sir. Sorry, yeah. Are they complaining?
No.
Are they complaining?
We just start over.
Madonna, they can hear. Sorry about that live stream. We've been neglecting you. Okay, go ahead. Yes, can you just give us your name?
Joseph, why is the mayor so scared to do town halls? Koch never was afraid to do it. Bloomberg did it. It's something that we as New Yorkers expect the mayor to be gutsy enough to face off against whoever comes there. And the mayor seems to be, in my view, kind of, not practicing what he preached when he was public advocate. It's sort of like once he achieves power, It's like, okay, then the rules are rewritten for him. And I personally think that it's a mistake not to do the town halls vote. You guys, as insiders, would know, why is he afraid to do it?
I think that's a really good question. And I think that goes back to what we were saying about this perception problem that he has. Like, it does give off this, like, when he was public advocate, he would be hitting Mike Bloomberg so hard if Mike Bloomberg wasn't giving town halls. And he hasn't, and I honestly, I don't have a good answer for that. I can say I've seen him. He is genuinely good with people. You know, I don't know why he doesn't do it.
I would guess that he is not alone in wanting to avoid unscripted, highly publicized encounters where you could potentially have a very organized, motivated confrontation. Andrew Cuomo doesn't really expose himself to that type of encounter. Remember the macaca moment from the presidential campaign a couple years ago, where one person saying something to a cameraman, an opposition researcher with a camera, helped undo a campaign. The idea that the media, I'll take ownership for this as much as anyone else, can seize on a moment, capture it, re-show it on television endless amounts of time. It becomes a theme on Twitter and on Facebook. Politicians are living under a much greater kind of microscope than they had been in the past. There's a very famous story about John Lindsay saying something very unflattering to a woman out in Queens, and reporters sort of looked at each other and said, yeah, we're not going to report that. And what could have been very damaging and embarrassing to a sitting mayor went unreported, whereas today, an innocent gaffe, a slip, showing up late becomes something that you endlessly replay. So I don't entirely single him out for that, but it's very clear. He used to say, the public leads and politicians follow, which would lend you to believe he would be doing town hall meetings, and he doesn't. So you're right that he set up a very high standard for himself and isn't living up to it.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess the other question for us is to think about, are there other ways for, in light of the technology that exists now, for the mayor to engage and have different kinds of forms of town halls? Because I don't, as you say, he's not alone in being frustrated. It's not always the best way to actually engage communities, right? I gather he just did a Twitter chat. Did anybody?
He did just do.
How'd that go?
It went well. I mean, it's Twitter, so it's very easy to ignore somebody who's. I mean, there were people saying nasty things, but like he was answering questions. I mean, that's going to happen, but there were many. It's Twitter. He also can only answer in 140 characters. So,
But the bigger piece for you is just where's the willingness to engage and also to be accountable.
Avoided a lot of the more pressing Twitter questions. He answered dumb questions like how tall is he? So clearly
Yeah.
avoided anything
Yeah.
that was uncomfortable when somebody like Koch or even Bloomberg or Giuliani might try to turn that around.
Would take it on.
Did Bloomberg do that? Did Bloomberg do that?
Bloomberg, if I remember, he did very controlled town halls. I remember going to one in Harlem that was in the Adam Clayton Powell building, and the people who were there seemed to be, I don't want to say invited, but perhaps encouraged to show up. But then again, I was on WNYC a couple of weeks ago talking about Bill de Blasio's potential shortcomings in light of another New York Times story, and Louis from the Village called in.
Right.
Was he encouraged to call in? Did he do it on his own? Who knows? But whatever venue it is, you could potentially stack the room, and I believe Bloomberg was no exception.
So that's one point I'll make. Just to everything that these guys have said is right, but if you're worried about saying next Tuesday I'll be at this auditorium, come with your questions, and having a room full of students first New York asking you why you haven't turned City Hall into a charter school, that's legitimate. So you don't, if you're a mayor, you don't have to have people come to you. You can go to them. There's every night there's 8 community board meetings around the city, and there are church picnics and stuff. Just show up and talk to people. It'll look good. He's a funny guy. He's generally good one-on-one. Probably better in one-on-one than in a controlled environment, I think. You could do that, and that way you would have the back and forth without worrying that someone's going to load up for you and take a transparency moment and turn into a campaign commercial for whatever the event is.
Which is back to this point that your aspiration for him is that he build a broader civic consensus, which means actually getting out with people. Okay, next person. Yes, right next to you. Yeah, go ahead. You.
Denise, I just want to say a huge thank you to Mary for what you do with the Municipal Art Society.
Oh, thank you.
And Jane's Walk and all of it, because it is so vitally important to this city and elsewhere. All right. Under de Blasio, the city's website leaves a lot to be desired where transparency is concerned. And props to Bloomberg for what he did with the city's website, because you didn't have to be a technological anything to be able to use it. I have a question regarding Uber. The TLC is archaic in many ways. The medallions, as we know, are incredibly expensive and way too slow to acquire. Uber and Lyft and whoever is going to come along next, yeah, okay, and all cars pollute. There was something that Giuliani did with the TLC. He made it mandatory for insurance to be $100,000 per medallion. Do you believe that there should be any form of insurance? We don't even know what insurance these drivers have.
The yellow cab drivers, whether they have insurance?
Uber,
No.
I think.
Oh, with
Uber.
Uber.
Uber. Sorry, when I went back to
Right.
these drivers, I should have said Uber, Lyft, all of this new innovation.
I mean, yeah, I have to say, I don't know exactly what the insurance requirements are. I mean, they're licensed black cabs, so I think there are requirements for them.
There are. There are.
You know, because they're like a black cab, basically. You know, there's there's different types of ways that they license them, but they are licensed as black cabs.
And Denise, your concern with the website is it's just opaque. It's not it's incredibly opaque. Okay, got it.
It's oddly organized. I'll agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
find
would-
it much more. Bloomberg's site was better. But they do have transcripts of his press conferences along with videos of his Q&As. Something that was not available under Bloomberg.
And those are
Okay,
great.
over here. Cynthia, the microphone's going to come to you.
I'm an alcoholic. Hi, it's really great to see
understand.
all of you guys, all my Twitter
Welcome.
friends. I will say about Twitter that the entire carriage horse war of attrition was brought down by one tweet asking if there were, why he hasn't kept his promise. Has anybody talked about this affordable housing? Got to build 200 million units, right? I have won the affordable housing lottery twice. And I went on the thing to see, I'm on hold for 4 places. The first place that I went through 4 months of vetting, and I was kicked out at the last minute because I had been evicted. And why do I need an apartment?
Yes,
Because I
exactly.
was evicted. I'm number 56,127 for one of the
NYCHA?
4 apartments. I'm 71 years old next month. Has anybody talked about how you actually get these apartments? It's a lottery. Is that the only way you get them? And has anybody ever talked about that?
Right.
Thank you. And I'm loving you guys, by the way.
And what are these that you're talking, what are them?
Oh, the apartment, the affordable housing units that he's predicated his entire whatever. I voted for the guy.
Well, he hasn't built them yet. I mean, he's
Well,
got
no,
he's
but
got
they
a post-
exist.
They exist.
No, they
You're
exist
talking about
now.
the existing
No,
inventory.
the 421A, the racket is that the 421A, I saw this guy in New York once say that the head of the real estate people, that we couldn't afford to build these units without the 421A tax incentive, the 80-20, that 20% of the units have to be affordable housing. So there are these units out there that people can't qualify for. I don't know anybody who's gotten one. Has anybody ever done an expose?
Anybody here
Anybody?
living in one of those units?
Or is anybody,
You are.
56,129 on that list?
Oh, and then,
Get one, I got picked like you were, but the one I got picked for, I was actually paying less money where I was.
Where you are, so.
no, this was a
There
500,
you go.
this was a 500, you have
So,
to make,
okay, so I think
So the
that,
question is, yes, I mean, people do get them. I don't know.
but it's a very small number. I mean, in terms of what the demand and supply you say.
Well, right. Well, that's the demand
That's
issue.
true of everything.
What is interesting is one of the many wrinkles inside the affordable housing issue these days is this question of whether the preferences the city has in those lotteries for community residents, whether those exacerbate segregation, and therefore whether they are legal under the fair housing law. And there are a few things swirling around about that. There's a larger conversation about the extent to which affordable housing programs, double down on segregation and fail to integrate it. And this is sort of the local version of that. So to that extent, people are talking about lotteries and community preferences, which is interesting because on the other hand, in places like East New York, people would like to have a much higher
community preference, so they know that the housing being built is for them.
It's for locals.
So this is one of those areas where it gets rather sticky.
Okay.
One of you guys can talk
Right about it. Yes, well, there you go. They've been taking notes.
I wanted to address a question that you guys brought up briefly about transparency. You know, when de Blasio was a public advocate, he was all about transparency. He was running for office about transparency. You mentioned FOIL requests. And in my personal experience, both myself, other private citizens, organizations, whatever, who have put in FOIL requests to this administration, you know, I know NYPD got an F, but we've gotten FOIL requests from NYPD.
Yes.
We've gotten FOIL requests back from EDC, from the DOH, or whatever. But anything that we have put into the mayor's office since de Blasio has become mayor has been delayed or whatever. And so we have some FOIL requests that have been out there for over a year, and the mayor's office refuses to respond to them. So I was wondering if you guys, as reporters who also do FOIL requests, whether or not you've noticed, A, this discrepancy between the mayor's office and their willingness to respond to FOIL requests versus other city agencies, and then whether or not, and how that compares to Bloomberg or other mayors.
So I actually wrote a story shortly after Bishop Feinlater, a supporter of Bill de Blasio, was arrested. The mayor made a phone call to a police official. He was released in circumstances that we could arguably say were not characteristic of what happens to most people. Arguably. In the Wall Street Journal article that broke the story, it said there were emails sent to administration officials inquiring about why Feinlater was arrested. So at some point, smart, brilliant people like me said, oh, let's just try to FOIL and get these emails and see what they say. First response I get back, we're looking into it, we'll get back to you at a certain deadline. That deadline comes in, that deadline arrives, I get a letter saying, we are still looking into this matter. They did not identify a time. And I end up writing a story along these lines of saying, here was the request, deadline 1, deadline 2, and here are all the questions and the back and forth. And I basically said, they are setting up a system by which they're going to delay for a prolonged period of time. Story goes up, and within 24 hours, the administration comes back with a very complete answer to my request. They don't have anything. But it ended.
But is it a managerial thing?
No,
or a deliberate thing?
What I later heard was that, and you hear this from every administration, we get so many requests, we only have this one person, and at some point it becomes, well, if you're getting all these requests and you're only putting one person in charge of it, you're doing this on purpose. But they have tried to address this to some degree. There was supposed to be some kind of FOIL tracker and all this kind of stuff, but by putting his schedule and transcript online, you're actually obfuscating the need for certain FOIL requests. There was a story by the Associated Press about the mayor's lawyers reviewing certain FOIL requests that relate to him. And the thing is, every politician sort of does this. And, you know, it's the barrier for the bar for transparency keeps on moving forward, and politicians always have a hard time keeping up.
So do you think that that's, just a follow-up question, so do you think that that's just simply that people FOIL request the mayor's office more than they FOIL request EDC,
Well, do we
for
actually
instance?
know? Do we actually know
Or is
whether
it,
the
or is
volume
it
is
just
higher?
something that's just become, because people are more aware of it, that it's more people are doing it, and so it's not a
Jennifer's gonna
problem
jump
that de Blasio might have, that Bloomberg might have had that de Blasio does?
Let's hear what Jennifer thinks.
I don't know if they are foiling more, but I would definitely say, like, it's very slow. It's noticeable. And, you know, there's another thing they do that's like a minor thing, but I feel like it's a real, very subtle sort of FU, which is they give us they respond on Friday nights at 8 o'clock at night, which is like the time you would bear. So no matter what you get, and like that's consistent, like every Friday night at like 8 o'clock, that's when they respond.
Isn't that wild?
I mean, it's such an obvious. I didn't want to say "f you," but like, what other word could you? I mean, that's a clear like they're, you know.
Or it could be, and this is, I mean, I agree that it seems like that to me, but when I get the phone call back Friday night at 7 or 8, to me it also just, it could seem as another indication of a certain level of disorganization. And to me sometimes it feels like people have been like, you know, running down their list.
That's what I was trying to determine.
Because I write for city limits, I'm at the end of it. But, you know, you know, they're like frazzled, and there's one more phone call, I'll call this guy, and finally get to me.
Okay,
So-
we've got somebody at the back. Yeah, go ahead. Right at the back there, we're going to get you. We really can't see you, so you're going to have to tell us who you are.
In the shadow.
In the shadow.
So I have a question regarding you said that Bloomberg, or not Bloomberg, but de Blasio likes to toss his constituents bones, and he does a lot for his constituents. I'm wondering if his black constituency got their bone when he kind of walked back, stop and frisk, because I look at the blowback that he got from the various police unions, statements like "you got blood in your hands," when he said the truth about his son and the chokehold in the conversation, they turned their backs on him. And it seems to me as though the blowback that he got from those unions has scared him into inaction at this point. When you look at things like Uber, it does affect people like me. I don't care about anybody else, what they have to say, because Uber picked me up when nobody else would. Right. When in the communities I work in, nobody cared about de Blasio until he put out the commercial with his son and the afro. And I'm wondering if he rode that wave in, and now he's kind of, if he's done, and what you all have seen as far as chokehold legislation and
You
things
think
like
that's
that.
it?
I think that's it.
You think that's it? Okay, what do you think?
I think I don't know how much the incident with the cops turning their backs on him in the hospital and at the memorial services, how much that shaped his point of view. But it was clear to me from the outset that de Blasio was only going to go so far on the public safety issues, for the simple reason that, agree with it or not, that's what could kill him. If he wanted to ensure that he would not be reelected, allowing any oxygen into the idea that he was going to let the city get back to the quote unquote bad old days would have been problematic for him. So I feel as though that's why he brought in Bratton. Was that? I can't hear you.
You think it's done as well?
I think so. Yeah, I suspect so. I think he's weathered through basically his first 2 summers without crime exploding, so we should feel a level of security. But I don't think he's going to do that much more. I think that he and his advisors are wary of the tabloids and the business community, thinking that he is allowing old New York to creep back. We see that in some of the quality of life stuff around the homeless
And the Times Square piece.
And so even though I don't think those policy changes that might come next would produce that, if he does anything that allows that perception to be drawn, it can be deadly to him. I mean, David Dinkins presided over falling crime and was tarred as a mayor, and also started the Safe City thing that basically began the crime decrease that Giuliani doubled down on. But the perception didn't follow that because he'd already lost that narrative. And de Blasio, fault him or not, I think that's what his people are terrified of.
And just to add to that, as mayor, he is under pressure to show results. After the grand jury decided not to indict the officer involved in the Eric Garner case, he very publicly spoke about having to quote unquote train that very same son from the ad to take special care when encountering police. And that's what sparked the anger from the police unions, along with other things. Year anniversary of Eric Garner's death, de Blasio spoke at a prayer service on Staten Island and said the police have, quote, come a long way, end quote, from the day of that incident. And I asked the mayor, have the police come far enough where your advice to your son has now changed?
What did he say?
He said he doesn't want to look backwards, he wants to look forward. No, and
because he's a progressive.
Because he's progressive.
No, so that is to say, as an incumbent, I think you will not see the type of positions and rhetoric that he might have taken as an elected looking for higher office, but I think that's part of the incumbency problem.
Right.
And he has made changes in terms of decreasing penalties for marijuana possession. There's I think 35,000 fewer people arrested this year than last year. So there are things he can point to, but he's at the point of having to identify accomplishments rather than just complaints.
And so one more point, the bail thing, because that's like a pet peeve of
yes.
mine, is pretty big.
Yes.
Him trying to introduce alternatives to bail in some cases, because that's perhaps worse injustice than stop and frisk, even what goes on with bail in the city. His addressing that showed some cojones, to use the term, I thought.
Okay, other people here that come on front forward. There's a woman right here.
Hi. Actually, it's a great piggyback off that gentleman's question. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the woman on the...
Jennifer.
Me?
Jennifer, hi.
Jennifer, hi.
Sorry. Because you had mentioned something about that you feel that de Blasio should try to sort of reach out more beyond his base. And
Right.
do you or anyone on the panel have any examples? Because it seems to me the people outside of his base pretty much hate his guts. I mean, they pretty much think de Blasio is a communist Marxist race traitor. So I don't see, no, I'm serious. I mean, I mean, there was a Wall Street Journal article interviewing, obviously, I don't know how they found these people, but these people were like, I hate de Blasio, and he has that wife, and he has those kids, and you're just like, what? It's 2014. At the time it came out, it was 2014. It's like, what are you talking about? So my question is like, well, what does he do? Because I feel like, and that's not to say that de Blasio shouldn't, I think any politician should be criticized, anybody we elect should be, and Obama included, should be criticized because at the end of the day, they work for us. And I was at this event last year, and I probably said the same thing. But I think he's sort of stuck because if he disappoints his base, then they may not come out for him. And then you've got people, outside of his base that pretty much, I don't know if he's going to win them over anyway. And also, I didn't know about the Hakeem Jeffries part of this. The piece of it, I haven't read the Times article, but it seems to me, and also I would like for you to comment on that as well. If he runs, I think that would actually help someone like Eva Moskowitz if she ends up deciding to run. Because I think that splits the people of color vote, the progressive vote, and then more centrist people are like, yay, okay, go Eva, or if some other person, some more centrist person comes out and decides to run. So I was just wondering what you thought about that as well.
So I think that's a really good point. And I remember that Wall Street Journal article. And when I was saying that like he should sort of reach out outside of his base, I really meant like I don't think by giving the people who do hate him any fodder to hate him. And I do think that sort of New York business community, the sort of people that really liked Mike Bloomberg, I think he, in some ways, some of the things he does feeds into it. His criticism of Bloomberg, the inauguration, I think that was sort of really viewed by people like he'd won the election and he let that become a really just nasty hit on Bloomberg, and I think that really turned a lot of people off. But even the like showing up late and the like going to the gym, like you said, they're fine things. He doesn't have to stop a shooting single-handedly. Nobody expects that. But it gives fodder to those people. And then also the charter school, like maybe that would sort of go a long way because that is a big issue. But you're right in that some people just hate him, and that's the thing with a politician, and you do have to be careful. Like you can't really play to the haters, because you got to be who you are. But I think maybe it would help him a little bit. And there's going to be people that still hate him. There's going to be, that's a fact.
But if they hate him, suppose he's really effective. Suppose he actually brings about success on certain things. Won't that win that other constituency?
The haters, the people who truly hate him and who would say anything like that about his wife, you're never going to get them anyway. But so here's an image that I have in my head, which is election night, general election night. De Blasio wins, has this big party at the Armory in Park Slope, and he gives this speech, and he's not, it's a pretty decent speech, and it's an exciting moment. He comes out, and there's a lot of electricity in the room, and he was maybe like 12 minutes into it, and people in the crowd, in his crowd, were already breaking into side conversations. There was a din of people sort of chatting and joking. He was like kind of losing. I always make a point of standing in the back of the room because I feel you get a better sense of that. And to me, from where I stood, like several rows up, he was already kind of losing those people. And so I think it's not a question of the haters. It's that his true base is narrower than the percentage of votes he got. And that percentage of votes was in a ridiculously low turnout year. So I don't think he's worrying about, people who read the New York Post, for example. But I think he might be worried about people who read the New York Times and people who, really like Christine Quinn and like that part of the establishment. There are a lot of different camps that sort of sided with him on election day because he was better than Joe Lhota, but that never were really in his base.
And do you think
that's what he has to reach out for.
Do you think he's doing things to keep those people in? Get them
he's done a lot of things, so I'm sure some things he would. But this is people who supported Christine Quinn certainly are of the mindset that de Blasio is not a good enough manager to be mayor of New York City. So anytime he feeds into that, he's losing a chance with them.
They disaffect a bit more, yeah. Okay, I think we can do one more. Who else has got one? Yeah, right here. Whoop, this here, down here. Well, we'll do two. You go, we'll do two.
I'm a bit concerned that it's been brought up, and it's by you folks and others have, of the hagiography regarding his predecessors on what they did or they didn't, accomplish. The movie star handsome John Lindsay, who was not a great mayor. The ostensible failures of David Dinkins, who came in under a recession, continued the housing program, expanded the hours of public libraries, and is responsible for community policing. The dropping that his successor saw was his doing. He just didn't get that.
Mm-hmm.
And
So what's
Bloomberg
your-
is not
what's
so
your
great.
concern?
My concern is that you build this up and you raise expectations that can't be met, and also it's traveling, an aura, positive or negative, that changes the whole discussion. And
And
I
you
would
can't,
like a
maybe it's too early to
response
tell. I think that's part of it. I mean, maybe we don't realize these successes at the same time that they're actually.
Well, yeah, some of them are. My own concern, and you might respond to this, is that the mayor, as a member of the council and as public advocate, was glued to the bottom of Michael Bloomberg on development issues, through which one could also see the screen of environmental issues, and I don't see a change on that. So the issue of affordability and greenness and dealing with sustainability can't possibly be handled properly.
Let's take the second question at the same time, and then the guys can respond to them at the same time. Go ahead, last question here, and then the panel will go.
You guys can do a joint
I was gonna say, are the two of you fighting with? Go ahead.
It could be a husband and wife job. I come at this, as you probably will gather from my fancy accent, from a rather different perspective. I heard the panel refer on a number of occasions to the word change, and I'm always mindful of the famous professor at Oxford University who was asked, how many Oxford professors does it take to change a light bulb? And his response was, change? But
I like that.
oh, good. I'm glad it's getting through in due course. There are a couple of observations I'd like to make from my very distant and very unobjective perspective. The first is that the other day I was looking at my real estate tax, which I pay in addition to federal tax, state tax, city tax, and one or two other little bits and pieces, which all add up. And the real estate tax that I pay here in Manhattan is about 5 times the equivalent in London. What the hell's going on with that money?
Okay.
Does anybody really know? Apart from over-policing national parades at double overtime on Sundays. But I'd like to come to what Jennifer was talking about, namely transport. During the time that the wonderful, exciting Second Avenue line is limping along with 3 stations on it, London is building a 38-mile tract through the center of the city to revolutionize communications, transport communications in the city. And what the hell is going on here? Seems to me FSA.
Okay. Do you want to augment that, or you're all right? So respond to both of those if you can. Go. How's it? And then we're
What's happening with your real estate money? That's a fair question. Whether or not it's considered over policing, again, that's a debatable point. Regarding the image of Bloomberg or Lindsay being too easily remembered in history, I mean, that sort of thing happens over time. And I think, as Jared said, Bloomberg's management was far short of perfect, but I don't think it had the same level of scrutiny as it should have. You could just look at City Time as one great example. But the standard by which you judge de Blasio, in part, is the standard he sets for himself. And he very actively said, in short, whatever Bloomberg did, I'll beat it. It is roughly the measure that he set out for himself on criminal justice standards, transparency standards. And just to go back to the woman who asked about Hakeem Jeffries, is his challenge going to invite Mayor Eva Moskowitz? Moskowitz and Jeffries occupy very similar space. They're both pro-charter schools. And if Hakeem Jeffries gets into the race, you might get what's called the clown car effect. Everyone thinks de Blasio is vulnerable. Everyone jumps into the race, and guess what? You have like a 15-person race, and someone who gets the narrowest a small piece of the pie beats everyone else.
Yeah.
So that's a briefer.
Yes, it's right. We reduce our mayors to very simple historical caricatures. We shouldn't do that, but it happens, and de Blasio knows that's going to happen, and so you got to guard against that. Running for mayor is a voluntary activity. I don't think anybody in New York is overtaxed except poor people who have to pay a regressive sales tax. So I don't know. Like the city does a lot of things that aren't that great, but we have like the greatest park system in the world. We have the ferry. We have there's a lot of stuff that I think my property taxes are too low. I'll say that. I live in the Bronx, so property tax values are rather low there too. And as for why London is doing that and we're not able to, I don't know, but they kind of talk funny over there. So.
Jennifer?
Jared Murphy, 2017.
Of that, yes. Of that, yes, about, the image of de Blasio. I mean, de Blasio's image is still being sorted out. Like, he's still in the fight. We don't really know yet what it is. So I think time will tell what that is. Of the taxes, there is an argument that there's too much taxes in New York. I think it's always on the most tax state. People are leaving, go to other places. But, people want to live here. There's a lot of, the issues here are complicated. And, we have schools, we have, many things. And we have a lot of poverty and a lot of wealth. So, but of what you said, the most interesting, I think, is what's going on with the Second Avenue subway and how we can't get it done in a way that, it's not even going down Second Avenue. This is, like you said, it's 3 stations. Like, it's coming in. Like, it's not going to go down Second Avenue and bring us to the Lower East Side. And that really, I think, is one of the biggest problems that the city has. Like, you can't expand the subway. Like, when I opened and talked about de Blasio being a driver, there are parts in this city where the subway system is not accessible to you, and it's shutting off whole neighborhoods, and it's making, these people, these outer borough people, they are city people. They'd probably love to take the subway into work, but do they want to commute for 3 hours? 2 hours? I did a story once about a kid. This is the last thing I'll say, but I did a story once about a kid who lived in the Rockaways, and he went to Bronx Science, and he was part of this UN exhibit on commuting to school. There were kids that had to take donkeys to school in the Andes Mountains. There was a kid who lived in Alaska. He had to take a sled. This kid in the Rockaways had the longest commute in the school because he lived in New York City. It was like 2 hours and 50 minutes. This was a UN exhibit of like a kid on a donkey, a kid in a sled, and we have this little like New Yorker. It was like the saddest thing, and he lived in a housing project. And so I think, that's one of the great tragedies of this city. And there's not much the mayor can do about it because that's Albany.
I love this notion. It's one of the great tragedies of the city. This is a complex place. We started by talking about this. We live in a city that has extraordinary challenge, lots and lots of challenges that affect us in different ways. I remember, and Jonathan, I would have expected you to quote Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said that I pay my taxes, it buys me civilization. So the question is, what kind of a civilization are we making here? And what kind of an expectation can we have of a mayor and his or her staff and colleagues, and how are we collectively addressing this? The piece about Crossrail in London, I couldn't agree with you more. MAS is a big campaign for Penn Station. We keep being told it can't be done. Of course it can be done. So we've got to find a way to collectively identify how we get a better commute for that kid from the Rockaways. Maybe we should be using donkeys. Who knows? Uber may be the new version of that. You can see the discussion isn't over. We have another couple of years of the de Blasio administration, and won't it be interesting to see what kind of leadership emerges? I hope you'll continue to contribute to that discourse. Think about the kind of leadership we need in the city as we continue to grapple with the real challenges and opportunities of a city like New York. Thank you to the Urban Democracy Lab. It's all about urban democracy. We believe in urban democracy. Would you thank my panelists for coming? Ozzie, Jennifer, Garrett. Good night.